So in doing this, I think what I'm calling for is to localize pedagogies, whether your context of being in Kerala or in Orissa or in Delhi or you're in Bangalore in a metropolitan area, in say a university like this. How do you cater to diverse bodies of knowledge to make social science engaged and therefore meaningful to their lives, and then at a second order to make it reflexive, so in as much as which they then rethink their received knowledge, rethink their own conceptions, misconceptions or biases or stereotypes that they may have. I think this reflexivity, which is making them question what was received, contextualizing their own lives, contextualizing their own experiences is very important, because as we have a diverse body of student knowledge, body of students, we would have to look at how students who come from privileged backgrounds also need to take a critical perspective. This, I think, is important because, as what Van Gorder, very important educationist, part of social transformative learning, spoke about, to speak to so-called rich or upper class elite students whose minds, he says, have been anesthetized to the lives of others, who in being privileged or being cordoned off from experiencing or knowing about others' lives. How do you make them critical? How do you say, look, it's not just to say, okay, what privileges I have come from depriving someone else, but what is the impact of my own life and my ideas on the others? At the same time, as we have a large body of students, and this many teachers across the country say, you have underprivileged students who are coming from government school systems, from rural areas, from officer areas, many who have experienced forms of humiliation, much of which I described in this case study I did, who are actually social scarred in many ways, whose academic performance may not be that good, who is now being constructed across the country as the weak student who does not know English, cannot understand concepts, cannot write properly, who underperforms in examinations, etc. How do you enable the student to look at his or her own life to then overcome some of this, so that academic performance becomes a format basis on, or rather emotional scaffolding becomes the basis or the foundation on which better academic performance can be built. So here social science actually should play a key role in recognizing the differences, different class positions of students, and also then enabling them to become more sensitive participants in a collective learning experience. Similarly, I think if much of what happens in classes can be made reflexive, we can also make it relational. For example, it is to relate anything that happens to the past, to the future, to see what would be the implications, to look at if it is relating to an individual case, to relate it to the structure. If it is about a community, it is to relate it to some other group or collective. If it is about an event that takes place, how does it look, what kind of processes have led to this event, etc. For example, in some of the classes we've done with government college students in Mysore, we did this as an experiment with just a small handful of them. We looked at, for example, a month at just public events that had taken place. 2 years ago, so there was this event where a very popular Kannada actor had physically abused his wife, and it had become a big case, and large numbers of his women fans had gone out in support of him, and the film fraternity had also, and the public discussion was, this kind of tension and conflict between a man and husband and wife is very personal. It should not become public. She should not have made it public because the wife had gone publicly to the police station, etc. So this, by looking at this event, we talked about the process. What is the discussion around it? We were able to actually unpack many of the biases that even girls had. For example, they felt that here was this hero and this was just an aberration. But it was for us to say, is this an aberration, or how common is it? Is domestic violence, is it not rampant? What happens, etc. So it is here, by being relational, we were not looking, when we made it into, say, a women's question, we also had to speak about masculinities. How is the new media constructing the average man? Why is violence, this machismo, this sort of the physical endowment being given much more importance than what a man can also be as a social being or a social person, etc. So being relational requires you to make these linkages between not only individuals or groups, but between the event, the structure, and the process also. Finally, you also need to make pedagogies engaged. And that could be, and I'm sure many of you as practitioners, as teachers would have many more examples. But to be engaged is not only actually doing, but also to make it more significant. For example, engagement would also be sharing your research. For example, if you've done a study in a college, would you go and share it with the teachers or the students you undertook the study with? By sharing, you also not get important feedback, but you also in many ways alter those people's understandings also. Just to give you another example, just very recently, although it took us more than a year, we did what is called collaborative action research in Chamaranagar with some agriculturists who were giving their land away on what is called lease to outsiders, people who would come and cultivate the land on commercial basis. They would, they can't buy their land, so they would take it on annual lease or 3-year lease and grow, it's mostly ginger, turmeric, bananas, and leave the fields devastated with high pesticides, all kinds of fertilizers, pesticides, and the water table would have collapsed. So we wanted to see this not as just an ecological issue or an economic issue, saying, okay, you're not getting enough, these people are getting the profits, but socially also where people who own the land had actually become laborers. It is only in these kind of sharing and and exchanging and reflexing can you make actual pedagogies also more engaged and bring about more awareness, if not in these contexts of changing. So quickly to conclude, if we face this challenge of needing to pluralize social sciences, pluralizing social sciences, if we can localize the pedagogies, if we can look at multiple methodologies, it's not something that has never been done. For example, some of you are from Pune, I noticed the late sociologist Sharmila Rege in the Savitribai Phule Center for Women's Studies has trained not only the students who come there but also the other faculty to look at issues that are immediate. For example, they brought out a very interesting recipe book. And who are the sources of these recipes? They were all the working staff in the department, in the university, who gave them the recipes. Was it okay? You would say, what is there in that recipe? But in giving those recipes, they also recollected what kind of food they had had with their parents, how the food patterns had changed, what was prohibited or not, why was it that they were non-vegetarians. The celebration in a context where vegetarianism is seen as superior, why would you then look at non-vegetarian eating or food or cuisine as also a form of culture, etc., and also a recognition, a reclaiming of their identities itself. Similarly, in Goa, Professor Alito Sukwera has undertaken some very interesting work. For many years, he noticed that as the student body was changing, large numbers were coming in who were not very competent in English. And here in Goa, where English itself is the official state language, it's seen as a major handicap. And there he found it was very disadvantaged class disadvantaged students who were speaking maybe Konkani or even other dialects because they came from very small communities. So he asked them, why don't you do studies on your own family or communities in your languages, and we will translate it into English. And that book is now forthcoming, it's coming out. It is only by students, where somebody has looked at certain rituals and said, this ritual used to be done during my parents' time, but it has died out, and now I want to know why. Or they spoke a certain dialect, but that is dying out now, it's more Konkani, so therefore what is the significance? Or a girl from a tribal group saying what is it for her to be a tribal who comes every day by those streamers across the waters of Goa. What kind of harassment does she face? As someone who's working the boat, she's not just commuting, she actually works on the boat. So what is it? So looking at the new working culture, etc. So these are only some examples, but I think the potential is very good, and it is teachers like you in your varied context, if you can develop many of these alternative localized pedagogies, I think that can lead to different bodies of knowledge, which in turn then lead to higher forms of theories, which then can actually then question this received body of knowledge we have. So if that is what finally, or in concluding, I would call for as very significant, and where both it is your responsibility but also challenge that many of you would face, I would say to do all this, I think we need to have a redefinition of social sciences itself. It is not just a discipline or disciplines on par with the other disciplines, physical, technical sciences, that look only at social issues, but it must see it has increasingly in its dissemination, in its understanding, has also been part of life skills education for students. And this is important because as life skills, it can also become part of social transformative learning, where you can endow students and also endow ourselves with a critical eye so that it can make it possible for us to address these entrenched inequalities which are so much part of our social reality and so much part of the very institutions in which we function and work. So with that, I'd like to just open up for all questions, including your own experiments, any endeavors that you have made which you would like to share, or any kind of challenges you are facing in looking at teaching a set or teaching certain texts. I would be happy to do that. And thank you for your time.